everyone, I'm Steven Sigman,
And I'm Mike Massinio.
and this is the weekly movie throwdown, where each week we look at two films that we think belong in the same conversation, and we talk through which one is better. This week, I'm pretty excited because it's the first time in this format where we're looking at an original and remake. It's what we're looking at is The Taking of Pelham 123. The original's from 1974, directed by Joseph Sargent, and the remake comes from 2009, directed by Tony Scott. Very similar and very different in a lot of ways, so it's going to be a lot of fun. But before we talk about that, Mike, do you have any wins of the week that you want to mention?
I actually don't have any wins of the week. I did want to mention, though, that I did finally get to see Kiss of the Spider-Woman, which I mentioned previously in the pod, where I'd wanted to see it in the theater, and it was gone so fast. So
It's been a real journey for you.
It is. It's been a journey. I've been waiting. And I finally saw it on streaming, and I was very disappointed. Fortunately, I had high hopes, and they've been disappointing. But what was interesting to me, because I hadn't seen, I saw the original, but I hadn't seen the Broadway show. So this is the first time I saw the musical. And I thought it was well directed. I thought all the actors were good. I thought Jennifer Lopez was good as well. I think that she was good in this part, even though it's hard to separate the Jennifer Lopez of it all from the movie. I mean, she's Jennifer Lopez. What I realized is that it doesn't work because the songs don't work. Like, let's put it this way. Like, I went to go see Ragtime. I told you I saw Ragtime in Lincoln Center. And that's also a movie that was made into a musical afterwards. So if you're going to take a movie, an existing product, and turn it into a musical, the songs have to be worthy of turning it into a musical, right? And I think Ragtime did a great job of that. Some of the songs are incredible and really powerful under the right singers. But none of the songs in Kiss of the Spider-Woman were memorable. Like, none. They just were almost songs to move the plot along, which they just didn't work. So there was nothing in the musicalness of it all that made it interesting. Like, every time they started singing, I was actually almost taken out of the movie, which made me realize the original movie is better because it just kind of focuses more on the what's going on in the cells. So anyway, yeah, ended up being pretty disappointing. I don't know if it should have only spent 4 days in the movie theater, but yeah, it was pretty disappointing.
So it's a loss of the week then?
Yeah, it's a loss of the week.
What you say?
Yeah, because I have to mention it because I had talked about it before and I had high hopes, so I ended up being pretty disappointed by it.
Yeah, the listeners were wondering. I mean, they wanted to know.
Yeah, I know, those three people that's really listen to this show and like movie musicals. We're waiting to know what I thought.
Well, they're going to be very excited next week if that's the case. My win of the week is kind of a show and tell. It is this beautiful new 4K release of Piranha, the 1978 Joe Dante movie. And for me, it's about the packaging as well as the film. I mean, the film is the film. If you don't know the story, it's kind of a ripoff of Jaws, where the government, I mean, just saying it out loud is nuts because the government this is post-Vietnam, and the government is still very much about like going after Vietnam. So they have this project where they're creating freshwater piranha that they can release into the river system in South Vietnam and have them swim upstream and eat all of the northern Vietnamese. Absolutely absurd. I mean, this is produced by Roger Corman. So, you get what you would expect you get from that. But beautiful 4K restoration. And I'm really keen on the packaging. It's a steel book, which means it's basically made of aluminum. So it's kind of more of a collector sort of thing. But it's great artwork from Devin Whitehead. And the package design is from Mindy Kang. And it's just, it has like a nice metallic ink on it, some spot gloss. It's very beautifully made. So if you're a fan of 70s schlocky genre films and graphic design and physical media, I highly recommend picking this up. It's filled with special features. It has a commentary with Roger Corman, with Joe Dante. And it has some interviews with Phil Tippett, the creature creator, who did some stop motion monsters in it that I completely forgot were there, and they feel a little out of place, but nonetheless, there they are. highly recommend it. It's just a lot of fun. It's very campy, but beautifully made. If you're a collector, pick it up.
Sweet. Hey, not
Uh,
to take my time back, but I just realized I do have a minor win of the week that I was thinking about and I forgot to mention.
Ooh, let's hear it.
Because you're talking about old movies. War Games is having a win of the
Oh,
week. It's kind of
okay.
bubbling back into the zeitgeist for people who have never heard of it, which some people probably haven't. 1983 movie with Matthew Broderick that involves a computer system that he inadvertently thinks that he cues to start nuclear war. And the whole movie is about whether or not it's a simulation or an actual command. And the reason this is starting to bubble up into the culture is because in the news the past couple of weeks that there's been this talk of AI being used to run war games, and the stat was like in
Yeah.
95% of the simulations, the AI chose to drop a nuclear bomb to end the conflict,
Yeah.
and that feels high.
Oof.
So people have been talking about how it feels a lot like the actual War Games movie. So it's having a moment. So for those who haven't seen it, maybe you should go back and watch it and get a window into how prescient that movie seems to have been.
This is really terrifying. I
It
mean,
is terrifying. Who would have thought when we were watching all these movies as kids that they would be so relevant 40 years later?
yeah, it's really
Because,
pretty
I mean, War
interesting.
Games came out in 83, Terminator came out in 84, and like, wow, that's pretty good. Or terrible, depending on how you feel about it. But it is something.
I think if you can't trust an intelligence to put the right amount of fingers on a person, if it's going to generate it, it should not dictate how a war is run. That's what I think.
Seems fair.
Yeah. All right. I mean, we could say that Taking of Pelham 123 is also a little prescient uh, in some
Yeah,
ways.
I yeah, I think
So
you're totally right. By the way, I constantly say taking of the Pelham, but only because of the Beastie Boys song "Sure Shot,"
yeah,
where Ad Rock says it that way, and I've been saying it that way my whole life because of that. Anyway,
yeah, I get that. Yeah. So why are we doing this pairing? This is we've actually done this twice on the podcast before we got into this format. Coincidentally with Walter Matthau when we did both versions of the Bad News Bears, and then we also did 310 to Yuma, but we weren't really looking at them. I think it's fully with like a comparative eye. So it's going to be interesting to talk about how we watch these specifically in that mindset. And
yeah,
um, you know, I think it's always fun to look at reinterpretations, especially because we live in this world of like constant IP recycling.
right.
So, it's almost unavoidable. But what I think is interesting about this is that there's such a distance. I always love doing things from the 70s just because they're from the 70s, but I also love seeing them remade like after technology has advanced. So you're really getting to see how modernity is sort of incorporated into that older story, and that's very much the case here. So
Yeah, and
it's
not just the
interesting.
fact of technology, but you're looking at New York reflected into very different time periods. I mean, you're looking at a pre 9/11 versus a post 9/11 New York as well, and there are certain things in the story that have to be reflected through that. The other thing I thought is that we've done two others. This is the first time where I feel like watching them back to back directly reflects how I feel about them, and I hadn't really thought about it until this, where I was watching them actually back to back nights, and I think I would see them differently if I didn't watch them so close together.
Yeah. I'm glad you're the one who invoked 9/11 on the podcast
That's
first
right.
for
Someone's
once,
got to
because
do
it's
it.
usually my role. But very important here in the Tony Scott versions. It's going to be something we probably come back to, but um, let's talk about the 1974 version first. And uh, the overview is obviously the same for the most part because they're the same story, but there are some differences. As it was written on IMDb for 1974, it goes like this. Four armed men hijack a New York City subway car and demand a ransom for the passengers. The city's police are faced with a conundrum. Even if it's paid, how could they get away? So, that's kind of something that you think about throughout the story. And so what's your take on on the original?
Well, I want to create some context first for this. So we're talking 74. And I think what everyone needs to understand is that we're dealing with two things. In cinema, we're actually seeing a lot of disaster movies. This is kind of when the disaster movies start. So there's a little bit of that. And I think that this movie owes a little bit to that period of time. But also, this period from the late 60s and the early 70s is the height of plane hijackings. So if
Yeah.
you look, this is when a lot of planes were being hijacked for various reasons. And so I think this story very much comes out of the idea of an extension of plane hijackings. Well, okay, now someone hijacked a train, but what the hell are they going to do with it if they hijack it? How do they get out? So this very much is a story of its time because a lot of stuff is going on around those things. So that's first.
But our favorite character, Kaz Dolowitz, even says, "Why didn't you hijack an aeroplane like everybody else?"
Right. So exactly. So it references that. So when I think of this movie, I I love everything about this movie. To be honest, I watched it with my wife, who wasn't sure she had seen it. She didn't remember it that well, and we just had a wonderful time watching it. And what I realized on rewatch is how many movies owe a debt to it. I didn't realize how influential it was until you watch it multiple times, where you see me. Everybody talks about the fact that Reservoir Dogs takes the color thing, and that's fine. But I think that Die Hard very much takes a lot from this movie. Uh, Even not just the setting of it, how it's constructed, with two people on microphones necessarily talking to each other, not seeing each other until the third act, but the idea of people hijacking something, but just doing it for money, when the initial thought is it's a different motive. But even the humor of it, I think that Pelham is a very funny movie. The 74 one is a very funny
Yeah.
movie in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. But it's funny because of the characters in it. It's not just funny to be funny. They're not jokes. It's not the other guys. It's funny because it's just full of such New York characters that the humor just is there because that's who these people are. And that's what I love about it. It's just such a time capsule of a certain period of time in the city, and not just the kind of people you would see in New York, but also the kind of actors that you would get in a 70s movie. And when you watch the 2009 one, you see exactly what the difference is. How everyone is just a bit shinier and a little more polished as opposed to these theater actors from New York that populate the original.
I was thinking about that. You you wouldn't cast Walter Matthau as a lead these
Not at
days.
all.
Uh, you and actually you don't cast him at that time unless there's a little inherent comedy in it. I mean, he was kind of in the middle of a run of more action-oriented roles here, but he still brings that comedy, especially with the end. I mean, the end is like ridiculously great in its comedy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, everybody in this film, Marty Balsam, even I can't think of the other hijacker's name, the kind of the thug guy,
You're talking about Earl
and
Hindman,
he's
the guy who plays Mr. Brown,
Earl
right?
Hinman is who I'm thinking of. Yeah,
So,
yeah,
did you know this? I didn't
yeah,
know this until later on. All right, God, I'm sure you know it.
yeah. He was Wilson on
Yeah,
Home Improvement. Yeah,
unbelievable. I
but you
guess
would
that
never know that because you never see him.
he only takes parts because you can't see his face. And this one he's wearing a hat and a mustache, and then he goes. That's how he chooses roles.
Yeah, I mean, going down that road was a long way of me saying that everybody in this looks like somebody, uh, who's just a New Yorker plucked off the street. I mean, that's the thing with the '70s is there's that realism to it, and it's very gritty, and that's what makes this so great. I mean, at its core, it's basically a procedural. I mean, it's almost like an episode of Law and Order or something. You're not really given a lot of like character depth or any kind of backstory for the most part. There's a little bit here and there, but it's all about like getting from start to finish. And I really love that about it,
Yeah, here's something for
especially
you,
in that setting.
which I just thought of. It's full of characters, but it doesn't really develop character. But because they're all characters, it's enough.
Yeah. Yeah. They all bring something that you just see on screen. So you don't, it's like a physicality or a look. You don't need to necessarily go into who they are to tell the story. And that's something that Tony Scott does in the remake that I think makes it wholly unique and interesting in its own way. But with this one, yeah, I mean, there's just it's it's really so straightforward and so New York, and uh, I really think of it as like a touchstone of the '70s because there's so much stuff that came out in the years around this that is so influential, and this is just a part of that group of films that really had such a lasting impact. I guess we're jumping ahead to some of the questions later on, but it's just really undeniable because of what it is.
Well, I think that you mentioned that it's very straightforward, and that's really what I think makes it work. It's not being dragged down by anything that's extraneous. It's because it's straightforward. You just get to kind of live in this world for a while without being distracted by anything. And for something that isn't a very expansive story, it's never dull. I mean, not for a minute. Like I never felt bored by this movie.
Yeah, I mean, there are moments where Robert Shaw's character is just sitting in the conductor car doing a crossword puzzle,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
which you would think he's bored, but you know, you're not bored as a viewer. And I think that's really a credit uh, to a lot of things. I mean, it's a credit to the writer. This was adapted from a novel by the author John Godley, adapted by Peter Stone, and it's in the writing. It's also in the editing. I mean, we're going to talk a lot about Tony Scott's editing, but I think the way that this was edited is really what helps it to move along, even when it's could possibly get boring. So it's not quite as stylish as the way the Tony Scott version is, but it does a great job of moving it along nonetheless.
Yeah. There's two things about the screenplay. I had to mention this. I stumbled across this as I was reading. You mentioned the guy that wrote the book, John Godey or John Godley. So he wrote another couple of books that were made into movies. One of them is he wrote multiple books about the tales of Johnny Handsome, which ended up being the Johnny Handsome movie with Mickey Rourke that we talked about a week ago that I got the preview of. How about that?
So there's DNA from last week into this week.
We talk about the humor of this, which I think is brought in by the actors, but it's definitely there on the page as well. And if you look at Peter Stone, that seems to be his bread and butter. He writes smart scripts that have humor in them. He wrote Charade, which is one of my favorites. He won an Oscar, I think, for writing Father Goose, which was another Cary Grant movie that he wrote. So he's yeah, I think he wrote Sweet Charity. So he's a good writer at taking stories and just adding subtle humor into them, where it's not necessarily a dominant comedy, but he's definitely got a knack for that, and you can see that here.
I don't know if Walter Matthau was in the running early on, but with the screenplay the way it is, he's such a perfect fit for the comedy of it all. And it's crazy that you have comedy in a hijacking 1970s story because everything around this time is so serious and just kind of intense. But Walter Matthau bringing a little comedy to it, I think makes it what it is. If that weren't there, I don't think it would be as effective.
You're right. It certainly makes it stand out. It makes it seem different from all the other movies, which take themselves very seriously. And as we were saying, I think that is, I didn't realize how influential this was in that way, where I think Shane Black is probably a fan of Taking Up Pelham.
Yeah.
Obviously, you see Die Hard and you see Speed in this movie. All of these template movies that we love, which mix action and humor, I mean, I wonder if the guy that wrote Commando watched Taking a Pelham. I don't know. I like to imagine that he
I'm
did.
sure he did.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so a lot of things that we love that we thought kind of came out of the '80s, I think have a seed in Pelham of being able to mix these two genres together, which really wasn't being done that much. I went back and rewatched Bullet recently, which kind of starts the cop genre, which wasn't particularly popular until the late '60s when they started making these anti-hero cop movies. But yeah, Bullet's not a funny movie by any stretch of the imagination, uh, and and so that's a lot of what we're seeing around this time. Anti-hero stuff, but not necessarily the humor. And so I think Pelham is a touchstone for that. And we don't necessarily see it pay off immediately in the subsequent years right after it, but down the road we start seeing it a lot more.
Yeah. And at the helm is Joseph Sargent. I think it's important to really talk about him because the remake is such a Tony Scott film. I mean, his fingerprints are all over it, and Sargent, for the most part, is more of a TV director, whether it's episodic television or TV movies. So this is one of the handful of films that he did, and to go from television to this, I think the way it's executed is pretty brilliant. I mean, the scale of this, using New York, using so much of New York in the subway system. I mean, there are technical aspects of that as far as cinematography and lighting go that are big things to jump over, and he just does such a good job driving the ship with this film with the experience that he had. So I'm really surprised he didn't do more film, but it really seems like he sort of made his bones in television and stayed there for the most part.
Can This is the only place to mention this. So can I please mention the things that Joe Sargent thinks that jump out to me? His directing career. One,
Yeah,
he directed Jaws: The Revenge, first of all, which is
that's
something.
the other film. Yeah.
Yeah, but he directed two of the seminal late '80s TV movies, which I'm sure you've seen as well. But to me, I remember them really well, and they both came out in '89. He directed Day One, which was, I mean, the day after is the one that everyone remembers, but Day One was also one of those
Right, right.
post-nuclear war movies, which was very popular. But he also directed the Karen Carpenter story, which I don't know why, but this movie has stayed with me. It's one of the few movies I remember watching when I was a kid that I think about all the time. I have no idea why, but it was huge. It was a huge TV movie when it came out in '89. For those who don't know, Karen Carpenter, she was the lead singer of the Carpenters. She battled anorexia. It's is one of those movies that if you were around, it was a big deal when it came out. So I just had to mention that here.
I think that the day after or day one, I guess it's called. Are
Yeah,
we ripe for another remake of that in the landscape we're in right now? But
could be.
the I think the scope of that too is something that is grand the way Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 is, which I think is so interesting because it's such a tight story, very contained. I mean, you're literally in a tunnel for the most part, but just the need to corral so much of New York City. I don't know why the banks are always like 5 miles away and that there's such a race to get to where they are, but you're really seeing a lot of New York in this film, and that requires a lot of, like, shutting down streets and getting permits and dealing with everything, and really, that flows up and is sort of on the director and the producers. He just it y I'm just really impressed with how he pulled off such a big project.
Yeah, and it has to be mentioned. You're talking about the stuff above ground, but it has to be understood that shooting below ground in the subway tunnels of New York is really ambitious and much harder than anyone can imagine because it's discussed in both movies as both movies actually do shoot in the subway system. And it's dirty down there. The thing about this one is that they all had to wear surgical masks, but there were shots that they had to wait to do because when you walked down there, it kicked up this dust, which God knows what was in that dust. But you had to wait for it to settle because you couldn't see anything because it was so dark and then with the dust. So you're dealing with all these elements that that you really wouldn't be dealing with if you were shooting in a studio, besides the normal stuff like rats and and the noise and all the things that come with that. So it is a ambitious shoot.
Yeah, and credit too to the DP, Owen Reiserman. This guy's a legend. I mean, he shot The Exorcist, The French Connection, which is a great sort of precursor to this in the way it's filmed because you have so many chase scenes above ground. I mean, he shot Network and Tootsie and like a million other things for him to be able to. But, you know, I watched this on this, this Blu-ray or this 4K version that I got. And they have an interview. There's actually like a featurette with Gerald Greenberg, who's the lead editor on it. And he was saying that even Owen Reiserman, who had all these great films under his belt, was very sort of like a fish out of water shooting underground because it was such a new environment to him. So a lot of the confidence that he usually had, he didn't necessarily have when shooting down there, and for all the reasons you were saying. So, but you know, he found that confidence apparently because he really pulled it off. And another thing they mentioned is that Gerald Greenberg and his co-editor Robert Lovett, they actually had to go out and shoot more footage as editors because some of that stuff didn't work underground the way it needed to. And I guess that's reshoots, or I don't know if there's like B-roll stuff from above ground as well, but they needed to put more into the film to make it move a little more. So that momentum that you were talking about that is there even when it's kind of standing still is like a real credit to these editors for being able to just splice things in to keep it moving, and like going out and making their own footage to get that effect they wanted.
Wow.
It's very, very cool.
I mean, you also have to think about the people that lit this movie as well.
Yeah.
You know, lighting a movie in the underground tunnels had to be difficult because you have to keep it real, but you also have to make sure you can see. So, you know, I wonder if they, you know, this was a turn of using certain cameras or film stock that could shoot in low light. I wonder what they had to figure out in order to do it. Because, I mean, some of the scenes are very dark and you see people only in silhouette. And I'm not sure how much natural lighting they tried to use for this. If there's any, just trying to use the lights of the actual subway.
Yeah.
So I was thinking a lot about that, just thinking of the darkness and how to light it.
One of the other things that Gerald Greenberg, the editor, talked about is Stone's script had a lot of moments, I guess at the end specifically, where the car was you know, when it's careening toward, I forget where it's going. Oh, South Ferry. South Ferry is where, like, the final destination. What Greenberg was saying is that that's in the script, like it's getting up to 50, 60 miles per hour. But these cars, because the tracks are on DC current, they don't really get above like 10 miles per hour unless there's an engine attached. So the car that they hijacked doesn't have an engine in it. And there's no way it could have actually gone the speeds at which it's being portrayed at the end of the film. So this was pretty early on where they did things like this with speeding up film. So it was a little bit of a task to make it look realistically like it's going at that speed. So in addition to the lighting, like the actual current in the subway system is so low that they couldn't really do what was on the page, which I just found, you know, I love when there are little hurdles that they have to figure out how to get
Yeah,
over.
that's. I mean, I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but that reminds me of an issue they had in the 2009 version. It turns out that the individual subway cars can't run on the tracks by themselves. There's something
Yeah.
in the way they design the system now where you can't do that. So they had to get an older subway car and then fix it up to look like a new subway car so they could run it on the track. So yeah, all these little logistical issues that you don't think of at all, but they had to deal with.
That's interesting too, because it's possible that one of the reasons that happened is because of the 1974 film. I mean, it actually made an impact on the MTA. Like, for example, the Pelham 123. There hasn't been a train that's left Pelham at
Right.
123 since this film.
Yeah.
And so I think it was so frightening that there were kind of safeguards put into place because of it, and maybe that's one
Right.
of them.
Well, the other thing that I'm sure you read about is that the MTA was very hesitant to even sign on to making this film because and there were certain things in the book they wouldn't allow to be put in the movie. And the idea of the dead man switch is kind of an invented thing. That was the only thing the MTA would agree to because it's just not something that you could really do. So they wanted to have something that was a little bit fanciful because they didn't want anyone seeing this and thinking to try to imitate it. They were very concerned about this. And you might think, well, that's a bit silly, but think about like 30 years later when they made that movie Money Train with Wesley Snipes and Woody Harrelson, which is not a good movie. It's No White Man Can't Jump. But remember that after that movie came out, someone actually lit the station on fire like they do in the movie.
Jesus.
I don't know if you remember that story. It was a big
I
deal.
don't.
Yeah, one of the things in the movie is that someone, there used to be the help booths like right before you go through the turnstile where you can buy a
Yeah.
ticket or buy a token. And in the movie, someone just lights that on fire, and someone did it after the movie, like when the movie came out, and people freaked out and they actually removed the scene from the movie for that reason. I think if you
Wow.
get it on DVD now, it's not in the movie. So for anyone that thinks that they're overreacting, they're not. Like people will imitate crazy stuff they see in movies.
Well, that was a big concern with the MTA in this film, and they actually made United Artists pay a $75,000 insurance bond to cover any potential like copycats or anything that would come after it.
Wow.
So they were really worried about how this would play to the
I
audience.
get it. And let's put things in context again. We're talking 74. I mean, New York had enough problems. They
Yeah.
didn't need additional problems. So, and the other thing they said is that they could film the movie, but they couldn't show the subway cars as they were. That's why the subway car in the movie is pristine and clean, where in reality, I mean, there was so much graffiti in the subway cars and the stations and everything else. But in this movie, you get to see a beautiful, clean subway car.
Yeah, I was thinking, the one of the things I love about comparing these is how much the technology's been updated. But then I watched this one and I was thinking, well, the subway's not that much more updated than this, you know. So it looks a little more like 74 than it probably should, but budget issues and the ongoing battle that has been 100 years in the making. Um, let's talk about the cast.
Absolutely.
You know,
The best thing about
Mathau,
this movie by far.
yeah. And like we said, it's just this group of New Yorkers basically, and it's diverse and people who look like they're 60 when they're probably 30. It's a lot of that, like
Yeah.
how people
I
looked in
mean,
the
let's just
70s,
say
and
diverse in the
you
fact
know,
that it has all versions of New York guys, of New York white guys. Let's just be clear. Um, that's what it has in its
yeah,
diversity. Not the most diverse in other ways, but yeah, a bunch of
right,
New York characters.
yeah, very much so. And at the middle is Walter Matthau, who we had mentioned, known for comedy, but is in a bit of a run here where he's doing more action oriented films.
Yeah, I don't know if you're aware of this. The reason he stopped doing those is that he ends up having a heart procedure. He has a heart issue a couple of
Yeah,
years down the road. And
yeah,
that kind of prevents him from doing more movies like this. He kind of moves just more into straight comedy after this. But he did have a run.
yeah. But he's so, like I said, he brings that comedy that this really needs, and it's quite a nice balance to have him against not only the story but just like the grit of New York. And I would imagine in 74, today, a lot of these characters seem pretty comical, but in 74, I'm thinking they're probably great depictions of reality, like
Right.
somebody like Dick O'Neill, who plays Frank, the train coordinator or whatever he is.
Yeah.
That guy's so over the top.
This has the trio of just great 70s character dudes. So you have his name is Kenneth McMillan. He's the one that plays the commander who's in waiting at the car at the subway stop, waiting for the money to come. Is that guy? This Dick O'Neill who plays the guy trying to keep the subways running, and
Yeah,
our
Frank.
favorite Tom Petty, who plays Kaz, who's just so furious that any of this is happening and wrecking his day that he's not even mad the car's hijacked. He's just mad that it changed his day. And that's the thing, the '70s versus the 2000s. Back then the idea that someone would hijack a subway car is not only absurd, but as someone who's ridden the subway, they react the way we would react, which is just angry that someone did
Yeah,
something to mess up your subway commute. So, and that's how they respond to it. Whereas in 2009, after everything that's happened, anything that is a whiff of something that feels like a terrorist thing, all hands on deck immediately. You're dealing with it. Where in this one, it takes like 20 minutes before anybody even cares that what's going on before they actually get
yeah,
on the stick to deal with it.
yeah. And I think, uh, one of the, well, we'll talk about it later, but you're right. And the Kaz character is just one of my favorites from all film. He's just incredible. Worth watching the film just for him. I wish he were in it a little more. But the the, the villain is Robert Shaw, pre Jaws, but he brings sort of that heavyweight English
Pre-Jaws,
acting.
post-Sting, though.
Yeah, yeah, and he's so perfect in that role. The polar opposite of how John Travolta handles this character.
I'll say.
And he's so measured and very eh, you know he's going to be in Jaws, but I think of him as like a shark in this film. He doesn't budge. He's not interested in anything that anybody needs other than he just wants to get his thing executed. And I kind of love that coldness. And I think you can't have that in the remake, but here it works so well because that's kind of perfect for 1974. I mean,
Right.
I think it's just such an incredible performance from him by really doing not much of anything outwardly, but
Yeah. Uh,
chilling and doing crossword puzzles.
well, you also talked about the 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 idea of this being a pretty straightforward story. I mean, so much
Yeah.
so that in this one, you don't even really get the motivation for why he's doing this. I mean, in the remake, you get the whole backstory and understand the motivation behind it. In this one, there's none of that. He's just doing it, and you're not sure if there's any ulterior motive or something spurred it on, or he just thought this was a good idea. You really don't know.
That's what makes it so interesting. I mean, you're kind of afraid of this guy. You just don't know. I mean, you know that there's something in it or he wouldn't want money, but they don't need to tell you what it is. And that's what makes it such a tight script and just such a smooth ride because you're not bogged down by any kind of exposition or any like extraneous stuff that doesn't move the plot
Right.
forward.
And a very good contrast between a modern movie and an older movie. They don't feel the need to tell you this, and nor it doesn't matter. It's extraneous. They could tell you, but it's not important, and they don't feel the need to beat you over the head with anything. They give you the story, point A to B, and they don't waste time giving you stuff that is not totally pertinent to the plot.
I think that's kind of a hallmark of especially the early '70s. You're just kind of dropped into this gritty situation and you follow along as they move down a path. And there's not a lot of backstory. There's not a lot of really knowing who any of the characters are. I mean, that's not the rule, but movies I can think of, it's kind of like that. Like it's situational and it doesn't matter where they came from. It almost doesn't even matter where they're going. It's just you deal with it in real time and get to the end. Martin Balsam is kind of like the linchpin of this film and just an absolute legend. He's probably one of my favorite character actors. He's been in countless things from 12 Angry Men to All the President's Men to this. It's just so many things where he's sort of in the peripheral. Here he's a little more front and center, but he's so unassuming. And I think that's what I really like about him is that he's never like a bad guy. He's never necessarily a good guy. He's just kind of a guy getting along in the world. And here he leans more toward being a bad guy, but right from the beginning, he's very reluctant about it. And he really just kind of creates this character in the little nuances of using the Vicks stick for his nose or just saying at one point, I think I'm going to die today. He's just so good at dropping little hints. And really, he's the only one you end up knowing a little more about because he's kind of the villain who gets away. He's just it's great to see him in a little more of a big performance because he's just so good at what he does.
And well, we'll put a pin in that, but that's such a hallmark of a '70s movie as well that the minor character ends up getting away. We'll talk about that. We'll probably talk about the comparisons, but that's just another thing to note. Few things in the cast that I have to mention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tony Roberts, who plays the aide to the
Yeah.
mayor, such a great role. He's so good in it. And that's where a lot of the comedy comes from. The idea that the guy who counsels the mayor is just exhausted by the mayor, who just seems incompetent, and he just and brass taxes all this stuff to him. That whole scene in the real Gracie Mansion, by the way, they actually got permission to film in the actual Gracie Mansion, which is cool. But the scene where they're all sitting, he's with his wife, and they're trying to figure out how to pay and what to do, it is just such a great scene. And not only did Tony Roberts have a lot of great lines when he talks about the fallout of it, the Times will do this, the Post will do this, these people will support you. I think it's a great line. It's so cynical, but so good and speaks to the time. But Doris Roberts, I didn't even realize that was Doris Roberts until I watched this for the third time. So from Everybody Loves Raymond, and she has my favorite line in the whole movie, which is when they're talking about, he says, what do you think I should do? Or they're basically trying to figure out what the positive of it would be. And she says, you'd have 18 guaranteed votes. Which, that is probably my favorite line of the whole movie.
Yeah, it's really fun. And you can see that she's kind of, well, everybody's running things except for the mayor himself. He's just like a figurehead.
Exactly.
Even his wife is weighing in and making decisions for him.
And we should also talk about that, though. So the guy that plays the mayor is Lee Wallace. That's the actor, I believe. And when you see him, you immediately think of Ed Koch.
He looks so much like him.
Looks like Ed Koch. But this movie was made in '74, and Ed Koch doesn't become mayor till '78. How did they know?
Yeah. Maybe that's what, voters remembered this film and
it is
when
possible.
They saw Ed Koch, they're like,
and what's really funny is that the mayor at the time, it was Ed Lindsay, Mayor Lindsay, was actually a really good looking guy, so much so that he tried to get into Hollywood. And I think he was in a movie that came out around this time too. So they had an actual mayor with movie star looks, but they cast a guy who looks like a schlub that ends up being the next mayor. So they were ahead of the mayor curve.
Well, I think that has to be this mayor character. I mean, because he drags his feet and he's so, but the funny thing is that he's up for re-election and he's interested in those votes and he's so worried about his appearance to the public. So, but he's just so bad at being a mayor.
My other favorite scene is that when the mayor comes to the spot where he meets the cops at the drop where the money's supposed to be, and he's coming because everyone just starts booing. You don't even see him.
Yeah,
you just hear the boos, and then the cop is like, "Oh, the mayor's here." I love that too.
Yeah,
everybody just hates him.
That's such a New York element to it, isn't it? I mean, I don't know of another city that's so vocal in that way that this could be. Not really a parody because it's pretty accurate, I think.
It's totally accurate. And that's what we mean by it being funny, not just for funny's sake. It's not even, I'm sure it's supposed to be funny, but not comedy, but true life, funny because it's true life. And this is just how things are. These are how these people are. This is how the people would respond to the mayor walking by because they don't like him. That's just how things work.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, it really makes you see the absurdity of that period, I guess, even though it was like such a crime-ridden city at that time. I guess the levity kind of, I don't know, it makes it a little easier to live there, or I'm not sure,
Definitely.
but
The only way to survive in New York in the 70s and 80s is to have a hard fought cynicism about the way things are. I don't think there's any other way to be.
feels that way now,
Yeah, we
actually.
carry
So
that over to now when it's less bad, but
yeah.
I just think that is something that's passed on to you. It's just how you operate.
Well, I think spanned out into like the world at large with that cynicism now. So that's the only way
That's
to
a
get
fair
by.
point.
Uh, Last character I want to mention is Rico, played by Jerry Stiller, who he's fine. I mean, this is the kind of stuff he did back then. It's not the high volume, Costanza father or the King of Queens character that we would see from him later on, but he's just one of those character actors in the 70s who's in things. He's good at what he does, a little more toned down, but what I thought was interesting is that I read where there's a scene at the end of the film. So Rico is basically the MTA police chief, and he and Walter Matthau, the Garber character, have to go investigate people who they think could potentially be the motorman who's involved in the hijacking. They get to a toll booth and they talk to a guy in the toll booth. Do you know
Yeah.
the story?
I don't know the
So
story, but I love this scene because again, just such a
yeah.
pitch perfect kind of scene.
So what you can't see is that Jerry Stiller brought his kids to work that day, and in the back seat in that shot is Ben Stiller, but you wouldn't know it. So Ben Stiller's in the car, not in the movie, but little baby Ben Stiller's in the car during that toll booth scene, which I think is great. But that again is another perfect example of the cynicism. This guy's like, "Oh, you're the police. You're still paying me 50
Right.
cents or whatever it is to get through this toll."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was going to say that we talked last week about the crime that they didn't make more Nice Guys movies to have those two characters, but I was listening to some people talk about this movie, and a lot of people regret that Taking of Pelham wasn't a huge hit because they would have loved to have seen just more movies where Rico and Garber are investigating things, like the two of
Yeah.
them together. It just makes such a great pair that
Yeah.
that would have made for some fun movies.
Would. I'm glad you mentioned that it wasn't a big hit because it had a $3.8 million budget and it made almost 19 million at the box office, which is successful. But what's interesting is that the places it did well were London, New York, Toronto, and Paris, all cities with subway systems. Outside of places where there were subways, nobody was really interested in it. So I just think that's
That is something,
fascinating.
huh?
Yeah,
Oh,
pretty fascinating. Let's move on to the strengths and weaknesses for this film. What do you think were some of the strengths of it? Many, I believe.
I mean, you said I think the cast is fantastic. I love the script of this movie, and the few little things that were added that weren't in the book, like Martin Balsam sneezing, the fact that he has a cold, that is added to the script. The characters being named colors, that was added to the screenplay that wasn't in the book. So all these little touches, I think the screenplay is excellent. There just are not a lot of flaws in this movie. I don't. I find it highly. Well, I don't want to spoil the questions later, but I think it's highly rewatchable. I think it's moves really quickly. I think it's very entertaining. The only weaknesses that I really see in it now, of course, is just kind of the casual racism and misogyny of the 70s. And of course, you have to have a prostitute character and um, those kinds of things. That's just very much of its time. It's not great to watch now. Oh, by the way, just to jump back 1 second, just talk about the cast. I didn't mention one other person in the cast that I want to mention, who was Julius Harris, who plays the police commander who Garber is communicating with. So that's a guy who he was in a couple of the Shaft movies, so you might recognize him from that. He's just a guy that you kind of know his face. he was in Superfly, and he was in Shaft's Big Score. He played Teehee in Live and Let Die. That's where you really know him from. He was the bad guy in one of the Bond movies. But
Yeah.
I know him because in the late 70s and 80s, he's just one of those guys that kept popping up if you watched a lot of TV in the 80s, which I did. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned him because I recognize his face. He's one of those guys that you know his face. You don't necessarily know what you've seen him in because you've seen him in everything.
You know, the only, since you mentioned him, the only real thing that frustrated me with this was sometimes there's so much bureaucracy and so many people involved that it was a little hard to keep track of like the chain of command. An example of that is when the mayor decides to pay the ransom. He okays it. It has to go to the police commissioner, then it has to go to the borough commander, then to the chief inspector, then to Garber, then through the MTA to Robert Shaw. And that's like 10 people who have to get that command before Robert Shaw knows what's happening. So there were so many police people involved and so many MTA people that I kind of got a little lost with that sometimes. And not that it matters. I mean, you know, you're just watching a bunch of dudes solve a problem, so it's not a big deal. But you know, if I had one knock on it, that's what it would have been.
Well,
Is
I'll
that
say
too many people?
that I don't think I realized that Garber was a cop until very late
So he
in
had
the
his
movie.
gun. Yeah,
I don't think I realized that honestly because he's the one showing around the Japanese businessmen, which is
right.
also a pretty funny scene, by the way. I love the payoff of that.
Yeah,
They think they don't
yeah.
understand anything.
Again,
That's a
great
very
comedy.
70s 80s kind of thing. But
Yeah.
yeah, because he's the one showing them around. You feel like he just works for the MTA. I think it took like 45 minutes before I realized that he was an MTA cop. But maybe that's just me not paying attention. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing is like there's so many people in the MTA that you don't know who's a cop. You don't know who's like you know, the Frank character, the guy who moves the trains around. And they kind of condensed that a little bit in the 2009 version,
Yeah.
which we'll get
And you
to. But
also wouldn't necessarily know that Rico was Garber's boss.
yeah,
He
I
just
had no
seems like a
idea.
really lazy guy who works at the MTA. So, um,
Yeah.
but again, it's a
So,
70s movie. They don't need to tell you stuff you don't
right,
need to know until you need to know it. It's fine.
exactly.
Just kind of let it roll.
And you never really need to know. That's the thing. I mean, the story moves forward. It doesn't matter who's giving the information. All right, well then let's move on and talk about 2009. This one's directed by Tony Scott. Overview of it, very similar, but it has a little bit of a different twist to it. Armed men hijack a New York City subway train, holding the passengers hostage in return for a ransom and turning an ordinary day's work for a dispatcher, Walter Garber, into a face-off with the mastermind behind the crime. And the face-off part of that is interesting because the face-off with Garber and Mr. Blue in the 74 version is Robert Shaw electrocutes himself on the third rail.
Right.
And it's just so unimpactful. It's like very weird that, but very 70s.
100%. That's what I'm saying. Like looking at these two movies together, it's such a great example of 70s filmmaking versus 2000s filmmaking in so many ways. And one of them is that the fact that the 74 movie, the climactic scene between the good guy and the bad guy is not only kind of anticlimactic, but it's not even the end of the movie. Like he dies and then they have to move on and the real end is them catching the last guy. In the
Yeah.
2000, in a modern movie, they would never do that. Everything moves towards the ultimate showdown between the two main guys. In this, that's secondary to the final part, which is a nice little police procedural. So you're watching them together, you can just understand the mechanics of how movies get made now versus then, and what you have to put into the script. You have two movie stars, you have to pay it off. They meet each other much earlier in the third act. The third act is really the two of them together a lot. Whereas in the other one, they're only together for a minute. If that. And someone made a great point. Not to be on a roll, I'm sorry. Now I'm running on. But
Please do.
someone made a great point that in the 70s version, he chooses his own fate. There's no shootout. He kills himself and he makes that choice. And someone actually said in a modern movie, you'd never see that. He would have to get shot a bunch of times by the good guy. And that's exactly what happens, right? In the remake, because that's how you have to pay things off.
It is, and the big thing I think is the remake is just this two-hander in a way where the people are like these characters are actually developed. Denzel's character, Walter Garber, and by the way, I wanted to ask you, Walter Matthau's character. Oh, I just put together that his name is Walter because of Walter Matthau.
Exactly. Yeah.
Jeez. Uh, can't think of a lot of leading men called Zach in movies, which is
Other
kind of
than,
bizarre,
I mean, Saved by the Bell, but no, not a lot of
right?
sex.
That's the only thing I think of. Yeah. But what do you, what Tony Scott does here and his scriptwriter, they turn it into like a real character study of these two men, and all of the extraneous stuff that you didn't need in the original film is almost falls by the wayside here because you're so focused on these two guys and they have dialogue from the very beginning. And the thing that ends up being the payoff in the original, the Marty Balsam character, basically here, Louis Guzman, he gets killed right away. So the whole point of the story in 1974 is like out the window now.
Right.
And because of that, you can focus on these two movie stars. Basically, I thought a lot about the movie Phone Booth with Colin Farrell and Kiefer Sutherland, where they're kind of locked into these two spaces and they have to communicate over telephone. It was a lot like that. And you're just, it's all like a story, exposition, and uh, also thought about The Long Walk, where, you have these people just walking and telling stories.
Right.
Not a lot of action for the most part. It's really, I mean, that's happening in the background a little bit, but it's really these two guys getting to know one another, which is the opposite of what happens in 1974. So
Yeah.
it's like a really interesting take on it.
And you're right. It's a two-hander versus an ensemble. Whereas in Pelham, you kind of feel like no one person dominates screen time in that movie. Where in this one, you actually have an excellent cast up and down, but most of the other characters barely get anything to do because you're focused on the two main guys. And when you cast two movie stars, especially nowadays, that's what you're going to get.
Yeah. They've invented a character, the hostage negotiator, Caminetti, played by John Turturro. And that's interesting because he's kind of representing, I think, the sort of police smarts that Walter Matthau's Garber had in talking to Robert Shaw. So because here Denzel's not a police officer. He was moving up the ladder, but he has a whole backstory. He took a bribe to recommend a certain type of train car, and so he's being investigated, and he's demoted to basically run the train system again as an operator or as a dispatcher. So there's so much story for him, which is really interesting, and it
Well,
goes such a long way.
it makes me laugh to hear you have a hostage negotiator, where again in the other one, it's like the hostage negotiation is, what are you bothering me for? I got trains to run. I don't care. Like,
why did you hijack an aeroplane?
Right. It's a very different way to handle a hijacking.
Yeah, there's almost a Kaz character here, sort of Kaz and Frank together in the Michael Rispoli character, who,
Yeah.
by the way, will always be Grandma from Rounders to me, but he's been on The Sopranos, he's been in a million things. But
See, Michael Rispoli,
he's-
I always think of him in While You Were Sleeping, which is one of my favorite movies. But yeah, and that's the thing. He combines two of our favorite characters from the first one, and yet he really has nothing to do in this one,
right,
which is a shame.
except make bad decisions toward
Right.
the end,
Nothing
because he's the
but
one who's
this-
like, they're still on the train.
Yeah. Nothing
Yeah.
but bad decisions.
Which Garber does, Walter Matthau Garber does in the original, but then he kind of realizes, oh, they're not on the train. So, yeah, so there are just so many nuances here that have been adapted to tell really a different story, or at least put a different focus on the same story. And one thing I mentioned to you before the show over email was that the posters for these films really tell you the differences because the original is just a great, like, Bad News Bears style poster of an illustration of the whole subway car with everybody in it, sort of tilted. There's a machine gun in the foreground. And then the Tony Scott version is just Denzel and Travolta close ups. There's not even a train on the poster. So it really tells you what the stories are. And I think that's just so interesting because it goes from this broad procedural to just a two-handed character study, and it's really cool.
It also speaks to how much better movie posters were in the 70s too, but that's, they're real art
Oh,
back then.
I
There's been a
have
whole
so
episode
many
just talking about that. Yeah.
things. Yeah, that I'm writing a lot about that lately because it's so clear that it, I won't go down this tangent, but the Tony Scott version is clearly designed to be on a DVD box. So you're seeing the two movie stars like front and center in like close-ups, and then later on tiles on Netflix.
I hadn't thought about
Whereas
that.
that's
Interesting.
not the case in 74. Um, this is a Tony Scott film, so it's like crazy kinetic and, you know, there's such a vibrance to it and such an energy with the color grading and so many cuts and so so much B-roll that it's almost overwhelming.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so the writer is Brian Helgeland, who's written a lot of really good movies. I mean, he wrote LA Confidential. He wrote Mystic River.
Won an
Uh,
Oscar for that.
yeah, great screenwriter. And Tony Scott, of course, is Tony Scott. And the two of them together in this movie is just a lot. It's a lot, and it made me think about something because when I was listening to the original stuff about the original, so Walter Matthau didn't love the fact that there were like 7 F words in the one from the 70s. He wasn't a fan of using foul language in movies. He just thought that it was unnecessary. And he felt that in drama, if you're selling it right, you don't really need to emphasize it in that way. The work will give the emphasis that you need. So clearly he would hate the 2009 version of Pelham because even for me, who loves Tarantino movies, I felt the language was completely over the top and unnecessary. It's almost like in order to give us the same kind of realness we got from true New York characters in 74, the shorthand for like New York realness in the new one is just having everyone throw F-bombs around indiscriminately. Like that's how it felt to me.
But primarily John Travolta, and I'm wondering if there's a lot of ad-libbing on his part, and that's just kind of his go-to.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but
there are
think
like
about the
30
opening
F-bombs.
line, the opening sequence where the kid in the station's talking to Garber's character. The very first sentence in the movie has like 4 F words, like right out of the gate.
Yeah,
And I'm like, wow, we're in a very different movie right now.
right. But Travolta really leans
It
into
really
it.
leads into it very much.
Whew.
And I don't, and you know something, I realized I don't love cursing Travolta tough guy. It's not my favorite Travolta.
I don't either.
It almost feels like it's strange coming from him. I just don't, I don't want to see that.
Well, we'll get to him.
Yeah.
Actually, let's just get to him now because the story is very similar.
Yeah,
and
you have to get to him because it really is the crux of the movie. It's a huge difference in the movie, and it's
Yeah.
the glaring difference. If there's any
Right.
one really really key difference in the movie, it's that the hijackers, the main hijackers, are night and day.
And what's interesting is the two like tertiary hijackers. There's nothing. I mean, you don't even see them for like 90% of the movie. Where in, Hector Elizondo, you saw him every once in a while. And because he had a character, I mean, he was the sort of like that Wilson from Home Improvement. I'm sorry, I forget his name. I don't want to keep calling him that. But he was sort of the loose cannon from the very beginning because he bumps into somebody on the subway platform and you're like, okay, this guy's going to be the one who can't be contained. But then Hector Elizondo is the guy who's like, he's like Wayne Grow, he
Right.
joins this crew and he's like very much his own thing.
Yeah.
But you don't have any of that with the 2 other hijackers in this film. Maybe a little bit with a guy who looks like Ben Affleck, but ultimately, they're there and then they're gone, and you don't even see them for most of the movie. So, even down the line, I mean, in a film where the characters aren't developed, they have more character development than in this film where the 2 main guys have so much development. So, it's just really interesting, and I think, yeah, that contrast between Robert Shaw and Travolta is astounding, but at the same time, you couldn't have that Robert Shaw character in this story, you know? He's not gonna talk to Garber on the radio all the time. He felt very desperate to me, whereas, uh, the Shaw character was like, "I'm just gonna do this thing," and you don't know, like you said, you don't know his motive, you don't know what the outcome is other than getting money. But John Travolta made it seem like this was kind of a last ditch effort for him to do something because he's very emotional, he's very exaggerated.
Yeah, but I mean, the way I took it, and maybe this is just my own feeling about it, is that it seemed like he was overcompensating to hide his true motive. That he was
Oh,
acting
okay.
like a wild card hijacker because what we find out is that he's really making money on a back end, and what he needs is
Yeah.
the chaos to drive the price of gold. So I think he has to make this seem as if this is a catastrophe to drive the market, which is what he needs. So I don't know. That's how I saw it. That I felt like that's what he's trying to do. So he's almost a cartoon trying to make all these machinations happen. That he seemed like a crazy person to move the things the way he needs them to go.
So what you're saying is he's sort of a leader in a way, distracting the people who want to focus on him by presenting some sort of manufactured chaos while he's secretly pillaging a ton of money behind the scenes. That doesn't sound very realistic to me.
Maybe it wasn't realistic in 2009, but yeah,
It sure
seems
is today.
seems crazy.
Wow. Uh, you know, you get 2 Travoltas really. You're either gonna get down the middle Travolta or you're gonna get my energy is out in outer space Travolta, and that's what you get here. And I feel like that's what you need in this particular role, but there's so much of it. And what I think about is how because he can play down the middle like that or absolutely insane, he was perfect to play Nick Cage in Face Off. Like the 2 of them are like almost one of one.
It
And
is
what's
why
interesting,
Face Off is the perfect movie, but maybe we'll do that one down the road.
right? But what's interesting is Nick Cage turned down this role to do Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New
Shut up!
Orleans.
Did he really? I
Yeah.
can't
So you
believe
could
it.
have a world where Nick Cage was in this role and it would be the same energy.
Oh,
That's kind of what I love about it. Travolta is the perfect stand-in for Nick Cage in this role.
he is, but missing out on Nick Cage playing this role, that especially for a movie that wasn't very good. Damn, that one
Wow,
hurts.
whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on. We might part ways
You
on
go on the
that
mat for
because
Bad Lieutenant?
Werner Herzog, man,
Yeah,
it,
that's fair.
it's nuts. That's the perfect place for Nick Cage, by the way. Um, so yeah, Travolta bringing what he needs to bring here, in my opinion, a little much, but it's really
I'm going with a lot much,
good for the
but
role.
that's just me. I'm definitely going with a
Yeah.
lot much for this. It was a little exhausting. I was kind of hoping he was going to crash the train at some point because he was wearing me out.
In contrast to that, you have Denzel as Walter Garber, who is Denzel. I mean, he's so measured and he's just like really chill. So there's such a great contrast between these 2 characters and they kind of meet in the middle a little bit, but really you have Denzel reining in Travolta's character. And I think that's interesting because this is someone who went in, the Travolta character writer, with this plan. But I think Denzel gives him a little more than what he was expecting, like more connection than he thought he would have. And maybe that is the distraction, like you were talking about, but it seems a little unexpected to me. And I really love that because you're sort of stirring the pot with Travolta and I don't know if anybody could do it as well as Denzel does, just because his energy is so perfect for a situation like this where he's dealing with hostages. Like, he would be a perfect hostage negotiator, you know? So I really think, you know, and of course he works with Tony Scott all the time. And I think those two create magic together. They really get one another,
Yeah, this was the
like
third.
Scorsese and De Niro or
Yeah, this was
something.
the third of their four movies together, and the last movie Scott made was Unstoppable with Denzel after this one. So
Which is interesting because that feels, even though that's not the case with this version, a big part of the beginning of the 74 version is a brand new conductor comes on board and is learning the ropes. And that's what Chris Pine's doing in Unstoppable. So maybe that's another Tony
yeah,
Scott
good
nod
point. And the
to
first movie
this.
they did together was actually written by David Brand Helgeland, Men on
Right.
Fire. So he wrote that. Tony Scott directed. That was the first time that they worked together. So clearly, Denzel enjoys working with Tony Scott because I think the only other director he's worked with more was Spike Lee.
Also worked with Spike Lee was John Turturro, who is in this as the hostage negotiator. And he's another one who can really go over the
Anywhere.
top if you need him
Yeah, you
to.
can go
Yeah.
anywhere.
But he's perfectly measured in this too. I
Well,
mean, he's very much
he's
mirroring
really
Denzel.
mirroring an actual guy. So the word is that they're the actual person who does hostage negotiations for New York was a consultant in this movie, and he came to the set and was really helpful. And Turturro basically just mirrors him so much so that he even dresses exactly the same. Like those blue shirts are exactly what the other guy wears. So he's really just channeling a real character, which I guess makes it a little bit easier to do. Uh, did you know this is the third movie that John Travolta and James Gandolfini are in together?
Uh, were they in,
So they
well,
were
they're in Get
in
Shorty,
Get Shorty.
which we covered on the show.
They were in a civil action, the court
Right, right.
drama, which I actually just recently watched about 3 weeks ago, which I thought was a pretty good movie. And they were in this one. So, I mean, Gandolfini didn't make a ton of movies, but he made 3 movies with Travolta.
He plays a very different kind of mayor here,
Yes, he does.
in a lot of ways, but in some ways he's still sort of a goofball, you know, but he sort of has a Giuliani look, which I love. You know, he's takes the train, which, I don't know, did Giuliani do that? Some mayors were taking, did Bloomberg do that?
I think
I can't
Bloomberg took the
remember.
train. You know what?
And
No, I
Bloomberg
don't believe
also,
Bloomberg took the train. I can't believe that's possible. But yeah,
oh,
you're
de
right. Someone did.
Blasio did. That would have
Yeah.
been later. Bloomberg did take $1 for his salary, though, which they say this guy does. So you have a little bit of those two mayors in here, but he's a little affable, but he's also kind of sharp. So it's a really interesting dynamic when you look at, you know, him versus
Yeah,
the
I
74
think that
version.
comes from Gandolfini though too, because they had offered him the role, and he spent time with Helgeland trying to flesh out the character. So I think that some of what you see in the movie comes from uh, what he put into there to make him want to do the character, actually. So I think they flesh it out a little bit and give it a little more nuance, and I'm sure that that's what eventually got him on board. Here's a question though: would you walk onto a train with a bunch of people and say out loud to the mayor that a train has been hijacked? Is that how that would be
No,
handled?
yeah, no, it would not. You can see the woman next to him; her face is just aghast when when he says it.
Yeah,
But the,
you just yell that out. I don't know. Maybe you'd get him off the train, talk to him privately.
even perhaps more egregious is now this train is going express, and there's going to be 5 stops
I
that we
know that's
skip.
unacceptable. I mean, I can't tell you. Yeah, it's just a certain way that New Yorkers respond to their trains being delayed. I mean, every time you hear that someone gets hit by a train, your immediate thought is, I can't believe this is going to ruin my entire day. And it's a terrible thought, but
Exactly.
everyone has it. That is the first thing you
Yep.
think of. And then you think, oh man,
Absolutely.
I feel bad for that person. But that is like third.
Right.
First is my commute just got ruined. This is infuriating.
So we're terrible people. Yeah, you know, outside of Louis Guzman, who really has sort of a minimal role in this, there aren't a lot of actors who we need to talk too much about because
No,
it's so tight on the two
yeah,
leads.
great cast. Again, like you have Louis Guzman in the movie, you would like Louis Guzman to have more to do, and he really doesn't. You certainly like
But
to
a
see.
great,
Uh,
just a great one-to-one with Marty Balsam, though. I mean,
yeah,
perfect casting.
and even so I'm trying to make sure I get his name right because it's important to me. But his name is Gabenga Akinagbe. He's the guy. He's the special forces guy on the train who ends up sacrificing himself. This is an actor that I love. I just feel like every time I see him on screen, I always think, why don't I see him more on screen? I mean, he played uh, Chris Partlow on The Wire, and he was in The Deuce. He was great in that. He was just recently in that show, The Old Man, with Jeff Bridges. He's
Right.
just he's just a really wonderful actor. His presence on screen is so engaging. And again, when I saw him, my natural assumption was he's going to have more to do, and he doesn't really. He ends up with kind of that one scene, and that's it, which is also disappointing. I just feel like you have this movie populated with some really strong actors, and you end up wanting to see more of a lot of them, but that's just not how the movie's designed.
He's kind of a stand-in for the police officer
Right.
from the 74 version because the police officer in this, like Louis Guzman, is killed immediately.
Yep. Yeah, they
And
very much tell you
that
you're in a
reminds
different
me,
movie. They dispatch with two of the key points of the first
yeah,
one immediately.
which I think is so interesting. But that cop in the 74 version, absolutely absurd when he finally gets his call to action. I mean, why would you not stop that train and focus on getting those people off of it? Instead, he jumps onto the tracks, injuring himself, is like down on the ground and decides to shoot at four men with machine guns, thinking he's going to get out of it. That is bad police work. I mean, so I was kind of glad to see him dispatched early on here, but yeah, I mean that airborne soldier, I thought there would be more from him too. It's too bad. So let's talk about Tony Scott really quickly. I mean,
What's there to say
this is
about Tony
such a
Scott? You either
great.
love Tony Scott movies or you don't love Tony Scott movies. There's really no two ways about it.
Well, see, that's the thing is I do love them. I mean, we talked
Me
about
too.
Days of Thunder a few weeks ago, and but I think this is peak Tony Scott to a point where it's too much. It starts out great. I think you get a real sense of the movement of New York City, but even in the beginning, it's a little much. But all the way throughout, there's just so many shots of just quick cuts and B-roll stuff that you don't really need. And I think
And
as you go on, that gets to be a little distracting for
well,
me.
yeah, I mean the good and again, as I said, because I watched them back to back, I have strong feelings about the second one where I probably wouldn't be thinking of this stuff if I hadn't already watched the original.
Right, me too.
Oh, the thing about the first one is that it's very tight on a specific part of New York. I mean, it expands to other parts of New York, but it's mostly on the ground, low level and in the subway, and it feels smaller. Whereas because this is a Tony Scott movie, you get those sweeping shots of the
Yeah.
skylines and the bridges, and you got to have helicopters because you have to have helicopters all the time, and it's moving around. It just makes it such a much bigger movie, whereas the other one is a small movie, and that is the one main difference.
Yeah, it's so big that they have Google Maps to show you that like the bank for some reason is on like Vanderbilt Avenue
Right,
in
Brooklyn,
Brooklyn,
yeah,
and then they have to go all the way to Manhattan to like 23rd Street. What is there not a bank? We've worked on 23rd Street. We know there are banks there. I
yes.
mean,
I guess
and
you have
then
to get it from the
even
Federal Reserve. I guess that's the only place you can get the money. Maybe that's what it is.
But even say, was it Gandolfini? I can't remember who it is, but somebody even comments like, "Why didn't you send a helicopter for this?" Because that would have eliminated so much of that Tony Scott action.
Yeah.
Whereas in the 74 film, you have one car that crashes because it's because of an ice cream bicycle
Yeah,
that pedals out
that's
into the street,
oh
which is
jeez.
just chef's kiss.
Yeah,
But
that's
in the
exactly
Tony
right. Because
Scott
there was that
version,
one person that's going to come out into the street no matter
yeah,
what.
the
But
Tony
yeah,
Scott version has like 12 crashes.
yeah, I will say I really think that the 2009 version suffers from comparison to the original in a lot of ways. Again, this is a movie I liked when I saw it originally. I still think it's a pretty good movie, but watching them together, the flaws of the 2009 one really jump out. But the money scene, the money delivery scene is 100 times better. I mean, this is what Tony Scott does well. I mean, are you
It's so
kidding me?
action oriented.
That scene is kinetic. I mean, you feel the tightness of the streets of New York, but you also feel the speed of it. And I mean, having an ambulance hit the cop car, that is just, it's fantastic. It really
And then
is.
a taxi, and then
Yeah,
another car. Like
right.
it's like
And then
every type of
Bigfoot
car
steps
that's
on
in New
it, and
York.
then, it's just everything. But yet the
Yeah,
two guys are
yeah.
fine. They drag them out, they're okay. Uh, so,
Although I will say that this eliminates that really cool scene of them counting the money from the 74 version that has that great music over it. That's the scene that has like such a fast pace because of the time. You're like, oh, we're on a real clock now. And uh the Tony Scott version doesn't have that, but I guess it has it everywhere else instead. So you don't really need it. But uh yeah, I mean, some of it was a little much for me, and
a
I
little
think
of
you're
it,
right. If
most
you
of it was too much for me. The majority of the movie was too much for me.
if you don't watch these side by side, the Tony Scott version really does it stands alone as a really interesting film. And I might have even seen that before I saw the original. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, you can see the good things that it takes from the
Right.
original.
It's a big
But in
movie. It's fun. It's got two great leads. There's a lot of stuff to like in it. Such a good example of what 70s filmmaking feels like versus a movie you have to make in the 2000s, which is just bigger, louder, it's more vulgar. It's just more of everything. And that's what you have to do to get a movie noticed on the screens in 2000. You're making it for bigger screens, you're making it for big sound, and there's something lost in that because you have to make this movie for a modern audience. And you lose a lot of the subtlety. There's no doubt about it. But does it make it a bad movie? No, it's a good movie to go see on a big screen, and you probably enjoy it.
It also had a budget of about $100 million more than the original. You could do a lot more with that.
I'll say.
But that's the thing, is you don't need to do a lot more. I mean, it was so good the way it was.
No, a good
I mean,
example.
yeah.
Good example is the scene where they're taking Garber to deliver the money to Ryder, and he has the conversation with his wife, which is a really nicely written scene, and it's a nice subtle thing that you get and character between them. But the scene was a disaster because Tony Scott demanded that it be done on a heliport where he has to get into a helicopter. And there's sound and people can't hear anything and it's like chaos. They're like, why? They could have had that scene on a quiet street. You didn't need it in a heliport. But that's what we mean. $100 million, you're gonna put that scene on a heliport because you can.
That's like every time that reporters interview Donald Trump and he's
Right.
standing in front of a helicopter.
Maybe it is. Maybe he watched this movie and he was like, you know what? Conversations sound better with choppers in the background.
The technology in this, I think that's a big part of, the difference between the two. And you get that immediately from being in that MTA control room, almost to the point where it's like Minority Report or something. And there are like zoom ins inside of zoom ins on the screen. It's digital. And that really adds an interesting wrinkle. They have Wi-Fi in the subway system. Um, there's a laptop that nobody sees for the entire movie. But yeah, that the technology plays an interesting role here. I mean, the entirety of the crime, the real crime, is done digitally. An interesting thing that I did not expect is that his character, Dennis, I can't remember his last name, Ryder, his real name, he was a private equity guy who handled the police pension for New York City, just like Steve Coogan and the other guys.
That's right.
It's all
A
connected.
lot of chicanery
It's
going
all
on with the
connected.
police fund. Jeez.
So I really love seeing that because any chance to call back to that is nice. you have anything else you want to say, strengths or weaknesses about this before we move on to the comparison head to head, which we've kind of been doing the whole time?
Yeah.
One thing
I,
I will note is that what I really loved is that Walter Matthau had a plaid shirt and a yellow tie, and they gave Denzel Washington a yellow shirt with a plaid tie. I thought that was a nice little
yeah.
callback.
I felt like the ad for Breitling watches was a bit much. I mean, that's such a glaring product placement thing, which I think that Travolta actually promotes those watches anyway.
Right.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to talk about was just cool things within the two movies as well that you learn in the 7401 about the access tunnel that they escape from in the first one. But in this one, you learn a really cool piece of New York history where you learn about the
Right.
Roosevelt Spur, which is one of those things that I just love to know about, especially because just a month ago I went to the Roosevelt Presidential Library for the first time. I dragged my
Wow.
kids there. I forced them to go to the Roosevelt Presidential Library on President's Day. So that was a few weeks ago. So
Very
I've been learning a
patriotic.
lot about Roosevelt. And the Roosevelt Spur thing is fascinating. So in when he was president, they built this little tunnel out of the subway line at Roosevelt Avenue to the Waldorf Astoria so that he could get from one to the other underground without being seen, so no one could see the fact that he couldn't get in and out of the cars without help. And so it was kind of a way to move him into the hotel, which is just one of those really cool historical things that I like to know. And they end up using that in this movie, which was a nice little touch.
I think that I got confused because I knew it was at the Waldorf, but they were at like 17th Street when they talked about it. So
Well,
I was a
yeah, it
little,
starts off there, but yeah, I guess but I guess that's where they ended up. Although
oh,
yeah, I
that's
don't
a
know
long
how the hell
walk.
did they end up. Yeah, that's a great question. How'd they end up at the Roosevelt Avenue stop? But maybe that's
Yeah.
just us because we know the subway. That doesn't make any sense. But in the movie, you could take a little bit of liberty about it.
I think they talked about that in the making. Like it doesn't matter if you're not from New York, you're not,
Right.
you know.
But yeah, we know where the Roosevelt Avenue stop is, which is in Queens. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah, again, just you're filming in the subways in New York, and especially in the 2000s, and they were filming in the tunnels as trains were running because they're not stopping the trains to film anything. So there's trains going
Right.
past them, and that's all real,
Yeah.
which I think is amazing. I mean, talk about a high level of difficulty. That's crazy. The other part I wanted to mention is that they both use the same place for the control booth, which is the Transit Museum in Brooklyn. So there's one subway stop that has essentially been closed. I think it's like Court Street in Brooklyn, and they turned that into the New York City Transit Museum, and it has an original board that they used to use to check the subway stuff. So they use that in both of these movies to for those control room scenes, which is a nice little touch, and made me think that I've never visited the New York City Transit Museum. I feel like I want to do that now.
Yeah. I've never been either. There's so many museums in New York I haven't been
Movie
to.
pod road trip.
There we go. Let's do it. Yeah, that would actually be pretty fun. I mean, there's so many historical, like cinema related things in New York. Maybe that would be fun to, I don't have to talk about that.
One other thing that I just remembered. So one of the nice little touches of the new one, the scene where Garber and Ryder meet each other. So that's the third act. So Travolta and Denzel Washington actually had not met in real life at all. They hadn't actually met until that scene when he brings in the money, and you can almost see there's like a glimpse of recognition between the two of them, especially the way Travolta plays it. And that's real because they are genuinely meeting for the first time. The whole time they were doing the dialogue stuff with the speakers, they were in like different parts of the set, far apart from each other. And they did that deliberately. So there would be this moment that they could have when they actually see each other, which I think is a nice touch.
It is. Do you think Denzel was responding in that first moment to Travolta's eyeliner and hair dye? Because that was a little shocking.
It's possible.
Shocking to see in person. I would think. All right. Well, I think we've kind of gone over the strengths and weaknesses, but let's quickly move on to our head-to-head comparison. A couple things that we want to just put side by side and see what comes out on top. Story effectiveness. I mean, realistically, it's the same story. So, uh, you know, or it's the same story but told in different ways. So, which telling of it do you think is more effective?
Yeah, I think story effectiveness, and we've hinted at this, goes to 74. I just feel like the 2009 one, I mean, because it's a two-hander, it's easier to be effective because it's essentially a two-person story. But there's just so much noise in the sequel that's almost subtracts from it. It's a bit punishing. So the story effectiveness of the original, without a lot of bells and whistles, it just makes it much easier to focus on this really tightly written story.
So, there's too much Tony Scott in it, basically.
A little too much Tony Scott.
Yeah.
A little too much Tony
Yeah, I
Scott. A little
agree.
too much John Travolta.
I mean, is there ever too much John Travolta? I don't.
I didn't think there was until now. Actually,
Well, we know where the limit is.
yeah,
There's a
we've reached our
ceiling.
the Travolta limit.
I think each of these is. I'm going to call this a tie because I think, despite the Tony Scottness of it all, the two unique tellings of the story really both have their own merits and they're very interesting. Gun to my head, I would say 74, but I really liked like you. I watched both of them back to back, and just being able to see the differences, I thought were really. It was such a fun thing to see like how they change it, and I think they did a good job with the changes they made. Well, I'm going to call it a tie, but maybe tilting towards 74. Again, I think all of these are going to be pretty similar, but characters. Well, this one's very different.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, who do you think are the better characters?
I mean, we already said this. I think the 74 one does a good job with very little of fleshing out more of the characters. You feel like you know them more than you know anyone other than the two leads in the sequel.
Yeah, it's such a contradiction, isn't it? I mean, you have characters in 74 who you know nothing about almost. And then you have two characters who you know everything about in 2009, and yet the ones you know nothing about are are more interesting in a way.
Right.
Yeah, it's very strange. Okay, let's see. Tone and consistency. Now, this is interesting.
I think that that's a tie. I think the tone and consistency of both are great. It just depends on which tone and consistency you prefer because they're two very different movies, but they are the movies that they're supposed to be.
I think the tone in 74 is so even keel and with like just the little flourishes of comedy makes it pretty straight across. But to me, the 2009 version, throwing in a lot of the Tony Scott stuff here and there, like the visuals, and then Travolta being so bombastic, really makes it feel tonally a little up and down for me. Uh, but beyond that, I think Denzel is like the model of perfect tone. So maybe he evens out those things.
I think
But
that
to me, 74 is the
yeah, I
winner.
think that what you see, and now that we've been talking about it, is maybe because this is the third movie that he did with Tony Scott. It he very much understands what his role is that he has to be the ground wire while all the electricity is going crazy everywhere else. That he has to center the movie and hold it down, uh, so everyone else can do the things that Tony Scott wants them to do. Maybe that's why they work so well together.
Every once in a while, he gets a chance to sort of light it up, though, which you love because it comes out of left field, and Denzel will blow up in a second, and that is always kind of fun to see because he's usually very tortured in those Tony Scott roles, and so when he sort of lets the tiger out of the cage, it's always nice. But yeah, he's definitely the grounded center while everything else goes a little crazy. Cultural staying power. I mean, it's no contest. There wouldn't be one without the other. 74 not only informs the Tony Scott version, but so many films
Yeah,
beyond that.
it
So
really is something I've been thinking about it all week, and every day, like I come up with another movie that I feel like feels connected to Pelham in some way.
yeah, there are just so many. And the thing is, I don't. know that people actually know about it outside of like filmmakers.
or people
It's
that
not
like
something you hear
Subways.
talked about a lot. Yeah, exactly. As we saw from its box office. But I don't think about anybody talking about this film who's not really into movies, and I think a lot of films from the '70s are like that, where they're so influential to the generations that come after them making movies, but outside of that, like Scarecrow, for example, the Gene Hackman, Dustin Hoffman movie, like nobody talks about that, but it's such an important film. So, and I think this kind of falls into that trap too, where it's just beloved, but only by a certain amount of people. But then, the things that it inspired go on to be beloved by the people of like present day. So there's a nice little ripple effect that maybe it doesn't always get credit for. Um, would you want to hang out with one of the leads or anybody from these films? I think we know who we're hanging out with.
I mean, if I could basically go to a bar after work and hang out with all the guys in the 74 movie, that would be the best thing. That'd be the best time I could ever have.
Yeah,
If I just
it
listen
would.
to, yeah, if I just listen to Kaz and, what's his
And
name?
Frank.
Yeah, Frank tell stories all night,
Yeah,
I don't think I can think of a better time.
like they make me want to get a job at the MTA just so I could be around them every day. Although you don't want to be on the receiving end of their ire because it seems like everybody's at fault
No,
except
that's
them.
fair. No, that's what I mean. I don't know if I want to work with them, but I would love to just go hang out at the bar afterwards. Which, by the way, one of the stories is that Robert Shaw and Walter Matthau, after shooting every night, they would go to the bar near the set, and they would drink every night together. I would also love to be there. I would love to be hanging out with
Yeah.
Robert Shaw and Walter Matthau
My God.
in between shooting. So yeah, hands down, 7-4. Even though I've always thought it would be cool to talk to Denzel Washington, who seems like a genuinely fun New York guy. Um, but overall, yeah,
Yeah. I again, everybody in '74, I think, is pretty much on the table for hanging out. But especially Kaz and Frank. I mean, those two, give them a show. I guess it's too late now, but that would have
it's a little
been
late, a
amazing.
little bit.
Would have hung out with Garber. Yeah, I mean
Yeah,
the character. I think just kind of a funny guy. Um, yeah, and I would hang out with Marty Balsam. He's when he gets a lot of screen time at the end, he's giving like Burt Young from Rocky vibes, like Paulie a little bit.
a little
And I don't
bit.
know if I would want to hang out with that, but in general, I would just love to hang out with Marty Balsam. He's the best. Okay, is this a career peak or valley for any of the main players?
Man, that is such a hard question to say because I mean everyone involved in these movies ends up having pretty long careers. So just for example, the guy that wrote Pelham, the 74 version, he won 3 Tony Awards. And the last Tony Award he won was in the 90s. He won the Tony Award for writing the script for the Titanic musical in like
Really?
96. So, I mean, he had a really long career. So he writes Charade in the 60s and ends up winning a Tony in the 90s. So, not him. Could be a highlight for Joseph Sargent because you've seen he moves more back into TV a little more, and this seems to be kind of the peak of his film making career.
He actually wins 2 primetime Emmys, though. I mean, is that
There you go.
equate to being at the helm of one of the biggest influential movies of the early '70s in such an influential time? I don't know, but
Yeah, that's
because it's
hard to say.
television. It's television in the '90s, so who knows? I mean, there's an argument to be made for Jaws' Revenge, but I don't know.
That argument is just by you.
Yeah, pretty much. So yeah, I think he would be the one of anybody, even though he does go on to do a lot of good work. I mean, there's nothing as memorable as or as influential as this film. So to me, it
Yeah,
seems like a career
I mean, you
highlight
could
for
say
him.
this is part of a peak run for Robert Shaw, but he hasn't made Jaws yet. But he passes away, 5 years after this. I mean, after he's in the, but this tail end of the run of the movies that he's making here is just quite a run.
right? Uh, Speaking of Jaws, would either of these films be better if Steven Spielberg directed it?
It's going to go hard no.
I think this is more his wheelhouse than some of the other things we've asked this question for in the past.
That's fair.
So here's something interesting. He was the first director considered for the 74 version and was in talks to do it. And one of the executives at United Artists said, he shouldn't do this. We think he's better suited to get onto Jaws. So if he had the opportunity to direct this instead of Jaws.
Who is the executive that made that decision? And did they get a raise? Like, that is really a good call.
Just think about the sliding doors of that. I mean, that would have changed everything if he had directed this.
Yeah, the reason I don't know if he would have been great for a movie like Pelham is, Spielberg's a California guy. He just is. Like, I just don't think he would be able to capture the true New Yorkness of it. So that's my only feeling about that. Could he do everything else? Yeah, he's a great filmmaker, but I think that we're missing that one little thing.
Well, then would one of these films be better directed by Martin Scorsese?
Yes. Yeah. 100%. I mean,
Definitely
could you
the
imagine? Like,
2009
think
version.
about if he would have made this 74. I mean, it would have been a lot darker. I'll tell you that much. But, but yeah, he definitely would have made a fascinating movie.
Would either film be better if you swapped lead actors?
No, because I mean, as we've seen, that's why it's doing the direct comparison is helpful, because what you realize is that these movies are only the movies they are because the actors are in them. And while all of these guys are good actors, I mean, Robert Shaw is not going to um, bring the energy that Travolta is bringing. So that's the very, very different movie.
I'd almost want a little more of that Robert Shaw energy in that film, though, but I don't think he could turn it up enough to
I mean,
get
could
close to
Denzel
Travolta
Washington have played
level.
the Walter Matthau character? Probably, but it's still a little bit of the subtle humor of Matthau being Matthau. Like, could he have given the look that Matthau gives at the end of Pelham, but some people consider one of the greatest endings of all time?
It's really
No,
out of left field and feels like a sitcom, doesn't it?
right. I don't know if
I
Denzel could pull that off quite as well as Walter Matthau does.
There's no way Denzel's making that face. I don't think he would agree to that. I read that his Mathau's son said he was sort of evoking Charlie Chaplin in that scene, or in that shot, which yeah, it makes sense. We never talked about that ending, but the freeze
No,
frame on Walter Matthau making a Walter Matthau face at the end of a crime procedural. I mean, that speaks to the comedy of it, right? So, all right.
it's
Well,
just
those are our
again such a
questions.
'70s ending. Like, that movie
Yeah.
could never end that way in 2009. Impossible.
It would be great if it did. I mean, I would love to see anything end like that in 2009. Okay. So those are our questions. Before we decide which film is better, I think we know, but let's look at our poll results online. This is where I tell you that you should follow us at Movie Throwdown Pod on all the social media. Every week we throw up a poll and ask you to vote for the upcoming week's films. This week, not as many votes as last week, but it was closer than I thought. Again, young people, whatever is more contemporary, they're going to vote for. 23-9, the 1974 version wins out. And I think that's kind of where we're leaning, right? I mean, we both agree that 74 is the way to go.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is,
And again, watching them together makes me realize that the 74 one is just a more effective movie, just a more enjoyable movie, to be honest. But if I was
yeah,
watching on a big
it's
screen, maybe the 2009 one. I mean, it's definitely made to be bombarded by sight and sound. So
yeah, that's an interesting point. I don't know that they really thought about that as much in the 70s,
no,
I guess.
oh, we
So
forgot to mention this too, though, that for the one in 74, most movies were still shot in like the 1:8:5 aspect ratio, and the cinematographer fought to get this shot in the 2:3:5, the wide screen, the anamorphic, and he showed them. He brought two cameras down and shot it both ways and showed them how much better it would look in the widescreen. And even though
Yeah.
it's a tight space, yeah, the wideness really, because it kind of looks like a subway car, like the idea
Yeah,
of
it's
it, the
train format.
aspect. But
Yeah.
being able to see the wideness of the shots really really adds something in the movie.
Yeah, it puts a low ceiling on it too. So you're kind of it's a little claustrophobic vertically, but more expansive. Yeah, that's so smart. I mean, what a cool thing. All right. Well, our winner this week is the 1974 version of The Taking of Pelham 123. We're in agreement, and the internet agrees as well. So, yeah, that's it. Let's talk about next week. Boy, we are taking a hard left turn next week.
Hard turn.
Uh, it's Oscars week coming up, so we thought it would be fun to have two Best Picture nominees battle it out, and we might change a little history here. It's going to be a film that won Best Picture and one that is sort of controversial, and maybe that it might have deserved the Oscar instead. So, boy, oh boy, I don't know about this one. We're going to go all the way back to 1964 and look at two musicals. We're going to talk about My Fair Lady, which did win the Oscar, and whether it deserved it over Mary Poppins or not. So that's going to be a departure for us.
Yeah.
So I'm looking
Everyone just
forward
stay with
to
it.
figuring
It's
that out.
it's good. I promise. It's gonna
I
be
think
a
it's
good
going to be
one.
a lot of fun. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. Musicals aren't really my bag, but I'm open to it, and we'll see how it goes. So, yeah, join us for that. And in the meantime, as I said, follow us on social media. We're at Movie Throwdown Pod everywhere: TikTok, YouTube, Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and vote on a poll. Tell us which musical you think is the better one, and maybe we'll read your comments on next week's show. So join us then for My Fair Lady versus Mary Poppins, and we'll see you then. So long.